Hi, and welcome to the DecisionWise Engaging People podcast. This is Charles Rogel, Senior Consultant here at DecisionWise. I'll be the moderator for today's podcast. Joining me is Dan Decca.
Hello, Charles, and hello, everyone.
Dan is also one of our senior consultants here at DecisionWise. Today, we're going to discuss a frequent topic that we measure on our employee engagement surveys. It's around fairness and respect and how managers can show fairness and respect and also improve that in the workplace. So, Dan, before we kind of address how to fix that, how would you kind of describe it? There's kind of a lot to unpack when you're talking about fairness and respect.
There's a lot there. I mean, the question that we usually use on the survey to assess this is my supervisor treats everyone in my work group with fairness and respect. Mm-hmm. And when you listen to that, there are definitely some elements around consistency. Mm-hmm. So consistency is very important, not to demonstrate any biases, any preferences. A lot of times we talk about an unconscious bias that someone may have. But so that's what I think of. And it's a combination because you may have listened to our podcast about caring, but one of the most important things about that is treating each person as an individual. Yeah. And when we think about fairness and respect, we're thinking about consistency, but at the same time, there's a need to respond to their individuality also. So fairness and respect sounds a lot like standards and consistency, but there is the unique factor in there.
So a manager might say, well, I treat all my employees the same. What's their problem? Why are they upset with me?
Yeah. And it's interesting because there's kind of like a level, there's like this hierarchy of needs. Like we want to be treated fairly and equally and the same in terms of opportunity, in terms of pay, in terms of access to resources and how we're treated. But then we also want our individuality acknowledged. Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that makes it challenging for a supervisor because there's some people that are just like, I'm going to treat everybody the same. And from a diversity standpoint and a consistency standpoint, that's good. But then we still, as humans and individuals, want to be acknowledged from our uniqueness.
Okay. So any examples, as you're coaching leaders in terms of how they've been able to be more, to kind of show respect and fairness to their employees?
I think one thing that helps a lot is involving people in decisions. So involving them in decisions that impact them, that transparency, that helps a lot. And there's some things that you can't be, open about because you're trying to protect confidentiality. Like maybe there's some performance variance on the team. Some people are rocking it. Some people need to have a discussion or even have a written notice. A supervisor doesn't share that. But around the topics that you can involve and be transparent around, there are changes in our organization. There are changes in our goals. The more you can involve people, it takes a lot of pressure off that supervisor because the supervisor isn't trying to, what did I say? What didn't I say? It's here is the truth that I know at this point. Yeah. I think something that holds people back from doing that is they're sometimes uncomfortable being in situations saying, I don't know. But I think they need to get really comfortable with that. Saying, here are all the things that we do know. This is why I'm communicating with you now. Here's what I'm looking for some input. And here's some things that I don't know and I won't be able to answer now. I think people lean away from that because they think they need to have all the answers. Yeah. But I think people feel much more comfortable in the environment and they feel it's more fair and respectful if we tell them what we know and what we don't know.
Kind of like building trust. It's kind of the foundation of the whole relationship you have with them as a manager.
Yeah.
So I know, one topic that kind of gets thrown in here is this idea of performance management. So as an employee, if I'm rating my manager on the level of fairness and respect, I see them, providing, and I see them not really holding an employee accountable that's not pulling their weight on the team, that can detract from my perception of their their fairness, how equitable things are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you bring that up, you're like, well, how do you demonstrate fairness on that? Yeah. And you can't talk with everyone about them individually, but when you make an effort to have one-on-one meetings, and they know that in one-on-one meetings, you're talking with them about their performance, asking about the goals, asking for any feedback. And if there's any place that feedback needs to be provided, you receive it as an employee, then you can be pretty confident that that is happening to other people too, in a good way. Yeah. And so it's kind of an interesting thought. You're like, how do you demonstrate consistency? By having a similar one-on-one interaction with each individual. So that's and again, sometimes that's hard if you have big teams. You're like, how do I meet with these 20 people? Or even some people have more, but you need to figure it out. It also doesn't take a lot of time. Yeah. It doesn't mean an hour one-on-one, a 5-minute check-in and like, here's the process, here's what we do. how are things going? Do you need anything from me? Here's some feedback for you. I think can establish that consistency, that fairness and respect.
So another, aspect of this is the idea of diversity and inclusion. So if you have diverse members on a team, are you treating each of them with fairness and respect? And how does that play out as a manager? How do you kind of juggle that? It's kind of a difficult topic for a lot of managers to address.
It is. I think if, like all things, if you move from a place of abundance versus scarcity, it can really help. And in terms of diversity, looking at that diverse group, and instead of being, how do I control all of that or make it the same, how do I try to magnify the strengths that are within this group? That's a healthy kind of mantra and attitude that I think can guide leaders to deal with very diverse groups. And again, it takes some of the pressure off of a manager rather than trying to control all of that. How do I understand it and leverage and magnify it? It's just a different mindset for approaching that.
Taking a more positive attitude towards it.
Because it can be complex, and especially in our day and age, there is a lot going on around diversity, a lot of wonderful things, but I think sometimes managers can get concerned or supervisors can be concerned. They want to make sure they don't do the wrong thing. But if we're moving from this place of abundance and trying to leverage the skills that we have for our common goals, I think that's a very strong foundation to move from.
Yeah, and it's interesting because some managers might shy away from this in a way where they feel like, well, I don't want to try to come down hard on people or have these performance conversations because they're difficult. I don't want to offend anyone, but I think people kind of respect the honest and open conversation. They respect being held accountable and being told when they need to improve. And so those conversations are good to have, challenging conversations that actually reinforce your credibility as a manager as opposed to detract from it.
Yeah, and it feels strange, like that you would develop credibility by having a difficult conversation or by saying no to something when you really believe we shouldn't be doing this. But it works that way. And like you pointed out, people respect you if you are willing to have the difficult conversation. I think they trust you more if you're willing to have it. I'm not saying you go out and try to make these difficult conversations happen. You won't need to. Problems will come up.
Sure.
And but by being open and honest and upfront, people see that you're willing to do that with them. They will have the belief, and you're demonstrating that you'll be able to do it with other people too. But it's almost like a reverse psychology thing. There's a part who's like, oh, I don't want to have any of those conversations, so we don't rock the boat. But people, if you don't have those, then people are concerned around what you're not saying. And I think as a supervisor, you can be clear to everyone, this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is where we're going, and I'm going to have a conversation with you when I have a question, and you can count on that. I think that's a much healthier place to work from, but it takes some effort.
Yeah, and I think it comes down, like I'm thinking about kind of the root, the foundation of all this is really this level of trust that you're trying to build with your employees, this relationship you're trying to create. And so by emphasizing and being more deliberate about the level of fairness and respect that you're exhibiting as a manager, it adds to or helps develop stronger relationships with your employees.
Yeah, and it creates that culture, and people will model that, and it will grow. I mean, everyone's looking for what's acceptable, not just what the supervisor says or the handbook says. What does the supervisor actually do? And they're watching you interact with everyone, and then they're also assessing how you're interacting with them individually.
Yeah, good point. Great. Anything else, Dan, that you want to add to the conversation?
I think it's just moving from an appreciation of individuals. I think that mindset of, first, it's a privilege and honor to supervise people and to lead people, to take that responsibility seriously, and then to deal with it and approach it more as a stewardship than an obligation. That you are, whether you have the idea of like you're guiding the sheep, like from a shepherd standpoint, or just the privilege and the honor it is to lead. I think when you move from that place and you honor that position, I think people feel that and will acknowledge it and move with you.
Excellent. Thanks. Well, thanks everyone for joining the Engaging People podcast. Check out our other episodes to learn more about how to become a better leader. And we look forward to having you join us on our next episode. Thanks, everyone.